was going to talk about the impact defense will have on business, but we're also talking about, I was talking about fears and fighting fears, and there was me doing this massive challenge of standing on stage, and I asked Paul about that, and he said he had a fear of flying, and to overcome that, he became a pilot. So I thought, right, you just blow me out the water there. So there you go. Paul, I'll hand that over to you if you're ready to start.
Nobody didn't tell me he was fancy dress, by the way. So, okay. I think the presentation was also a little bit keener than I am to get up here. So I apologise for that, Andrew. Let's just hope the IT works. Here we go. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, over the course of the next 10 minutes, I'm going to explore how defence will shape future business. But before I do so, I'm going to let the counterculturalist Edwin Starr have his say. Go for it, fella. Please.
Yeah. What is it good for? Absolutely nothing. Yeah. What is it good for? Absolutely nothing.
Well, Edwin, my dear chap, I'm afraid that despite your crowd-pleasing rhetoric, I'm going to argue that over the course of the next 10 minutes or so, that you're actually quite wrong. In doing so, I hope to also persuade you that defence, even by its most unpleasant and kinetic means, is not merely a caustic, futile and counterproductive perversion of human potential, and that this instinctive belief is at best socially conditioned and at worst intellectually lazy. I invite you to think a little bit more openly and with less of a pejoratively Pavlovian war equals bad paradigm. I hope that I can demonstrate that whilst undeniably destructive and often horrific, the defence sector and all of its key drivers will provide a fertile rather than futile landscape for business and is therefore worthy of further intelligent exploration. So, the past. Well, human mercantile development has always enjoyed symbiosis with any given group's ability to defend itself and thus flourish. And this has been an indisputable truth, with its roots even beyond the proto-agricultural societies of the Neolithic Revolution some 12,000 years ago. And though outside, largely, the public's popular perception, many of today's business-shaping inventions began as a desperately pursued, defence-related technological breakthrough, with many of the things that we take for granted today finding their commercial application only after being developed to win the 20th century's wars of national survival. So let me take you through a couple of key examples. Computers. Embryonic computer science and engineering was shaped almost entirely by the unrestrained military funding for the Whirlwind SAGE project, ultimately a failed attempt at automated radar shielding. And as much as it irritates me to give the RAF credit for anything at all, the development of the jet engine is single-handedly the work of Sir Frank Whittle, an RAF officer in the 1930s, before being used in the Messerschmitt 262 by the Luftwaffe towards the back end of the Second World War, and now, of course, enables worldwide commerce and global connectivity in the shape of commercial airliners. Moreover, satellite communications, cryptography, and oh yes, that thing called the internet, more of which later, of course, are all inventions that have shaped today's business world, and all born out of a defence necessity. So we've shown the pedigree. Now, back to the future. I will argue that this trend will continue across the next 70 years and will probably even accelerate. As before, it is defence's needs that will provide the most potent motivation for innovation across the 21st century, particularly as our enemies become more complex and asymmetric, and we move away from the concept of a traditional human-centric and kinetic battlefield. Not a particularly resource-light undertaking, with each nation's military-industrial complex having to be propelled with ever greater momentum to find greater commercial applications in order to pay for these hugely expensive projects. Money that could otherwise be spent on the public's heart and politician vote-winning things such as schools, and hospitals, and other crazily expensive stuff, like tube driver salaries. Now, I could quite comfortably fill a 2-week summit on how emerging defense tech will shape business over the course of the next 70 years. With cybernetics, advanced cryptography, virtual reality, and advanced human performance just being some of the things that this short presentation won't allow me to cover in depth. However, as a slightly amusing aside, in my research, I also came across a non-lethal pain beam that is under development, which could potentially have some application for post-millennial employee motivation, but perhaps only in North Korea, or following a slight loosening of HR ethics here in the West. But let's briefly explore just 2 positive arenas in which defense will positively shape the future of business, those of clean energy and global communication and connectivity. Okay. Even without the potential market-driving effects of global warming, fossil fuels are undeniably both dirty and finite. And so renewable energy and smart energy as well will play an ever-increasing role in the world's future energy needs, and thus international commercial geopolitics. To that end, a Spanish military tech company is currently working on a handheld fuel cell that will allow vast amounts of energy to be stored as well as being portable. And the storage part is the one thing that will solve the contemporary conundrum currently delaying the advance of clean energy. And in addition to their sustainable biofuel work, DARPA, the US research organization, their naval drone program is also close to a solution that will enable even the world's largest ships, one of the world's greatest polluters, to run purely and cleanly, simply on the power of the ocean's currents. And given that both demand and scarcity of strategic energy will only increase across the next century, plentiful energy is arguably going to be the preeminent commodity for the 21st century. And so it becomes self-evident that the military tech developments, such as the ones just discussed, will be instrumental in shaping commercial power across the next 70 years. Moving on to communications and connectivity. Well, the ability to monitor and control the future battlefield is driving vast amounts of research into ultra-high bandwidth telecommunication and computing power, and the defense sector continues to be one of the key leaders in this field. But put simply, the defense's paradigmatic advances in computing power will allow for faster and more accurate decision-making, with obvious applications right the way across the business spectrum. Moreover, the internet, which was itself born from a Cold War military program, will blur the lines between defense and commerce, as cyber warfare's ability to cripple entire economies and devastate national infrastructure approaches a quite worrying, tangible reality. We are already, arguably, in a time where economic cyberspace requires the exact same amount of care and protection as our national territorial integrity, and this trend will only ever continue. And with this, of course, will come pressures in future business ethics, as the diametrically oppositional concepts of data confidentiality and transnational security continue to clash with ever-increasing potency and frequency. But on the positive side, there is one program that will radically alter what we currently, and soon rather archaically, call the internet. Now, the resultant predictive analytics that this will enable will, for example, set the conditions required for the intelligent food production for the globally predicted peak population of 9.8 billion, currently predicted for 2070, thus sitting defense comfortably in a ripe and enduring market for the 21st century. The new internet, or ninternet, as I've decided to call it, you know where you heard it first, will further shrink our world and enable previously unimagined levels of trans-global communication, cooperation, and interconnectivity, and most probably in ways that we cannot yet possibly imagine. Consider, for example, trying to explain the concept of the current internet and what we can do currently with a smartphone to someone at Henley's opening day celebrations back in 1945. However, even if the technological advances driven by defense never find commercial application, the real impact that defense will have on future business actually lies elsewhere. I put it to you that defense will play the greatest part in future business simply by enabling the internationally permissive environment where business can take place at all. Happily, we now live in a time where defence touches few people directly. Yet, as Trotsky famously remarked, and 9/11, 7/7, Madrid, Nairobi, Paris, and Sousse have aptly demonstrated very recently, you may not be interested in war, but war is definitely interested in you. Today, the complacent assumption here in the West is that we take good order as a natural condition, and this can be taken for granted because nothing happens. But the fact that nothing happens is not an accident, and it's rather because of preemption and deterrence through sound defence. The free flow that makes globalised trade and the subsequent creation of wealth and prosperity possible depends on the presence of naval units in key waterways, troops stationed abroad, and the clear and evident ability to project both hard and soft power abroad as required. In times of peace, these are largely unseen and are therefore too easily forgotten. So I argue that defence will continue undeniably to be the unseen cornerstone of global commerce, primarily because, for the world's prosperity, our dependency for free movement of goods and service is and will always be a geopolitical fact of life. This is the classic operations defence, and I conclude this section by arguing that this silent aspect of national security, particularly as our multilateral instruments such as the UN and our continent of Europe continue to fade, will become increasingly important across the 21st century. So, in conclusion, I hope I've helped explain the notion of how defence has undeniably shaped the past 70 years and how it will almost definitely continue to do so across the next 70 and beyond. Not only will defence, driven by our need for security, generate a panoply of game-changing commercial applications, but business across the world will flourish through to 2086 because of defence's unique ability to assure, restore, and enforce the conditions required for it to take place at all. Or more eloquently, to paraphrase George Orwell, because rough men stand ready in the night to visit violence on those who will do us, or indeed our peaceable prosperity harm. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your attention. And pending your questions, which I expect to be quite ferocious, that concludes my presentation.
Again, Paul. Provocative. Very provocative.
Thank you very much. That was very stimulating. I very much enjoyed it as a military historian as well. And we didn't dress together this time. Any judgy questions? Yanis.
Thank you for your presentation. I think the underlying argument you're making is that defense can provide the necessary urgency required in order to create technological evolutions that will then have commercial applications very useful to wider society. But my simple question is, why don't we just make our efforts such that we focus on creating those applications for commercial purposes right away?
Of course, and I think in a perfect world where we're all nice and play nicely together and sort of don't do angry things to each other, and we don't have a world full of maniacs, you'd be absolutely quite right. My argument, or my answer to that would be that actually the threat of national survival, or indeed our innate, and that's on the bad side, but also our innate desire to help, is no more potent than when we're trying to stop bad things happening to good people. So my argument is that although, as I mentioned at the start of the presentation, yes, it's horrific, yes, it's unpleasant, and yes, it'd be better if we just all got on and played nicely together. Unfortunately, it's when there's nothing that provides the same stimulus and threat as war and protecting people who deserve it.
Sorry.
Thank you. My question touches on the ethical issues, which you did mention, and I just wonder who controls the information that is likely to be available about us as individuals, in that the defence industry, in the interests of the military, suggests that it would be state control. And I'm just wondering what your position is on the ethical issue of personal freedom and information versus the state, and in particular the current debate in America about developing a code to break the password on an iPhone, which is being debated with Apple saying, no, they're not going to do that.
Give me 3 years and I'll submit my PhD thesis on that very question. For me, You're exactly right. That presents a massive ethical issue, and of course, whether that power is held by the elected government or whether it's held by the judiciary. I personally, my personal views as a private citizen is actually that if you're not doing anything particularly naughty, then actually you shouldn't be particularly worried about people sort of looking at your information. I know for a fact that GCHQ are far too busy to be reading my emails to my mum, and if they did, then fine. But you're exactly right, and that is a problem that our sort of modern philosophers, politicians across the world are wrestling with. And I think it would be incredibly hubristic of me to stand here and give you an answer. I suppose the short answer is that living in a liberal Western democracy, arguably we need to just get on with the fact that we trust those that we elect in power, and if we don't trust them and we don't like them, we get the opportunity to vote them out. But again, that still leaves vast amounts of discomfort. There isn't a simple answer to that question.
And one more judge question.
Yeah, my question was, you very much focused on planet Earth. 70 years' time, a lot of technology developments. Actually, will you just not see all the countries around the world fighting for resources on other planets, and actually the arms proliferation will get worse, will get more difficult, and actually more resources will be diverted from hospitals, from medicines, from education, to actually make sure that we capture the moon, we capture Mars, we capture Saturn as the first country to do that. Do you not see defence actually becoming too paramount, too important, and actually consuming all the other resources that we need as a planet to survive?
I think, to be honest, so many of the technologies are actually complementary. But yes, you're right. I think eventually we will start to harvest space. My hope there would be that we have an international agreement, much in the same way as that we have for the Antarctic, that it doesn't particularly belong to anyone or to any one nation. It belongs to humankind. Of course, the difficulty there will be who pays for it. And what makes that even more complicated, of course, is that might not be what you and I consider to be a traditional nation state. That could be the likes of Elon Musk, a private individual. So if they've got control of the vast new resources that space exploration will bring, perhaps not in the next 70 years, but maybe the next couple of 100 years, then that will certainly provide the ethical philosophers of the time with quite a significant headache. And I think probably my grandson, who will hopefully be gracing this very stage, will be answering sort of very, very similar questions in 2086.
Okay, thanks very much. That's time's up. Thank you very much.